The Mojave Desert at 4 in the afternoon is not a place where living things choose to be. The sun does not simply shine in June in this country. It bears down, a physical weight pressing into the white alkaline basin and the granite boulders that rise from the sand like the stripped bones of something ancient and enormous. Joshua trees stand scattered across the flats, their twisted arms reaching outward and upward in shapes that look less like prayer and more like surrender. And the silence between them is the kind of silence that has substance, the kind you can feel pressing against your ears until you realize what you are hearing is the complete absence of anything willing to make a sound in this heat. Ruthie Slade was on the trail back from the supply station at Barstow, 9 miles from home, leading her mule through that silence, when she saw the shape beside the boulder. It was not the shape of a living person. One arm was bent behind the back at an angle that conscious muscle would not allow. The face was pressed into the sand. She stopped the mule, dismounted, and walked over. She knelt. She turned the body over. A man's face, swollen and bruised, blood dried in a brown streak from a gash on his temple down into his collar. He was breathing, but the breaths were shallow and fast, the kind that come when a body is running out of the resources it needs to keep going. She poured water over his face from her canteen, and his eyes opened. Gray eyes, clouded with pain, looking up at her from underneath dried blood and desert dust. "I do not need you to save me," he said. She did not answer. She was calculating the weight of him against the strength of the mule and the 9 miles between here and a roof. "I said I do not need—" "Be quiet," she said. "You are bleeding, dehydrated, and 9 miles from the nearest shelter. You need a great many things. Being quiet is the first one." He looked at her, and perhaps because he was too exhausted to argue, or perhaps because the way she said "be quiet" was not a request, but a fact of the natural world, he went quiet. That was how Ruthie Slade met Brennan Yates, not with a greeting, not with a story, with a command, a canteen, and 9 miles of sand between them and anything that could keep him alive through the night. But before we follow them further into that desert morning, just take a quiet moment with me. Some places and some people you do not forget the first time you see them. Ruthie Slade was 31 years old, and she had not been described in any story anyone told at any saloon in any town within riding distance of her homestead. Her hair was black and thick, braided into a single heavy rope down her back, because that was the only style that stayed out of her face when she was splitting wood or digging post holes. Her skin was fair underneath a dense spread of freckles across her nose and cheeks, the kind that the Mojave sun darkened a shade deeper with every passing season, until they became as much a part of her face as her eyes. She was full-bodied in the way of a person who never went hungry, but also never sat still. Soft belly, wide hips, solid arms, calves hardened by daily walking on sand. Her hands were broad and calloused across the palms from rope and axe handles, and the rough wooden grip of a water bucket she hauled twice a day from a spring a quarter-mile east of the house. Her eyes were dark brown, direct, the kind of eyes that did not look down first. She lived alone in a small house in the Mojave Basin, a place that other people called nothing, but that was in truth everything if you knew how to see it. Joshua trees, granite, a sky wider than any she had ever found elsewhere, and a silence so deep you could hear yourself think, which was both its gift and its punishment. Her husband Nathan had died of a rattlesnake bite 14 months earlier. He died fast, without time to say anything, on the trail home at dusk. She found him at the edge of the yard, his face already the wrong color, his hand still holding the reins. She buried him alone because there was no one else to help. After that, she stayed, not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere else to go and no money to get there. And then staying became habit, and habit became life, and life became the thing she stopped questioning and simply did. No one called her name. No one asked if she was tired. No one sat across from her at the table in the evening or said anything at all when the sun went down and the Mojave dark came fast and total. The house had begun to feel larger since Nathan died, not because anything had changed inside it, but because one person takes up less space than two, and the difference is not measured in feet, but in the quality of the quiet. She loaded Brennan Yates onto the mule, a process that took 15 minutes, 3 near falls, and every unit of strength she possessed. He protested in a voice that grew weaker as the minutes passed, but remained stubbornly unwilling to stop. "I can walk. You cannot stand. I can stand if you give me a minute. You do not have a minute. Another half hour of this sun, and you will not be speaking at all." She led the mule 9 miles home through the white sand and the granite and the silent Joshua trees, 9 miles where her feet pressed heavy prints into the dry ground, and she did not stop once because she knew that if she stopped, she would not start again. She put him on Nathan's bed, the only bed in the house. She cleaned the wound on his head, stitched it with needle and thread, and poured water into his mouth in small sips until he stopped swallowing and slept. Brennan Yates was 32 years old. She learned this when fever took him on the second night and loosened the things that, sober and lucid, he would have kept locked. He was a horse breaker, the kind of work that ordinary people did not do because it required a body willing to be thrown to the ground 20 times in a day and climb back on each time. He stood close to 6'4", the tallest person in any group he had ever been part of. His shoulders were so wide that when she cleaned his wounds, she had to walk around the bed to reach both sides. Muscle was visible under his skin, even lying motionless, not the kind built by exercise, but the kind built by living, the kind that belongs to a man who grips the reins of an unbroken horse with bare hands and holds on until one of them gives up. His hair was a reddish-brown, tangled and unwashed. His skin was deeply tanned by Mojave sun. His jaw was square with an old scar on the chin, his nose broken at least twice. His eyes, when the fever brightened them, turned more silver than gray, like the desert floor under moonlight. He had been robbed on the road east from Bakersfield. 3 men. They took his horse, his money, his gun, beat him, and left him in the sand to die. They did not know how stubborn he was. He crawled nearly 2 miles on a broken ankle before he collapsed, and Ruthie Slade passed by. On his left wrist there was nothing, no cord, no token, no sign of anyone waiting for him. He carried no photograph. He mentioned no name in his fever except his own, repeated as though reminding himself he still existed. A man entirely alone, not by tragedy, but by design. A man who had been moving since 16 and had never stayed anywhere long enough to leave a mark or collect one. The first 3 days, he was the worst patient she had ever encountered. Not because he complained. He did not complain despite obvious pain, and that was somehow worse. He was terrible because he would not stay still. Every time she turned away, he tried to stand, tried to reach his boots, tried to reach the door. She caught him twice, bracing against the wall, dragging himself toward the porch, his face white with pain, but his jaw set in a stubbornness that had clearly been with him longer than the injuries. "Where are you going?" she asked the fourth time. "I cannot lie here and let you wait on me. I am not waiting on you. I am keeping you from dying. Those are different things." He looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was not ingratitude. It was shame. The particular shame of a man who had been taught that needing someone was failure, and who was now needing someone more than he had ever needed anyone. "I will make it up to you," he said, and his voice was grave, as though it were an oath. "When I can stand, I will do whatever you need before I go." She looked at him. "Can you fix a roof?" "Yes." "A stable?" "Yes." "A stone fence?" He looked at her. "You're making a list. I am making a list because my house has needed repairs for 14 months, and I am not tall enough to reach the roof peak. So you get well. I need you standing." That was the first time since he opened his eyes in the desert and said, "I do not need you to save me," that Brennan Yates did not try to get up and leave. He lay back, not because he was giving up. Because for the first time there was a reason to stay. He healed slowly, slower than he wanted, slowly enough that his pride had to learn to wait, and while he waited, he watched. He watched Ruthie Slade do everything: split wood, haul water, cook, mend clothing, tend the mule, check the rabbit traps each morning. He watched her do all of it alone without complaint, without asking for help, without any indication that she needed anyone for anything. On the 5th day, he made it to the porch for the first time, on a crutch, with her permission. The Mojave sunset was burning. The sky was a violent orange-red, Joshua trees printing black silhouettes against the fire, and the desert stretched before them wide and harsh and beautiful, in the way that beauty is beautiful when it does not forgive. Ruthie sat on the step, a cup of coffee in her hand. He sat beside her, slowly, painfully, but sitting. They were silent for a while. "Your husband died here," he said. It was not a question. He had seen the grave behind the house. 14 months ago," she said. "Rattlesnake. You have been alone since. Nowhere else to go." He was quiet. Then, "Do you want to leave?" That question. No one had asked her that question. Everyone asked why she stayed. No one asked whether she wanted to go. Two entirely different questions. One judges, the other cares. "Sometimes," she said, and her voice was smaller than usual. "Then I wake up and there is work to do, and I stop thinking about it." He nodded. The nod of a person who understood from inside, not from a safe distance. "I have never been anywhere long enough to want to go or want to stay," he said. "Since I was 16, I have been moving, breaking horses here, there, no house, no need for a house." He looked down at his splinted ankle. "At least I thought so. And now? Now I have been lying in a stranger's bed for 5 days, and the thing I think about most is not when my ankle heals." He looked at her. "It is why I have never sat on anyone's porch at sunset." She said nothing, but her hand tightened around the coffee cup. Every morning after that, 2 cups of coffee appeared on the table instead of 1. Every evening they sat on the porch and watched the Mojave sky go from orange to red to black. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes the silence was enough. And that silence, the comfortable kind that lives between two people who do not need to fill it, became the thing that changed the shape of the days. It was not love, not yet. Not in any word either of them would have used. It was rhythm, The rhythm of two people sharing a space and discovering that the space worked better with both of them in it. In the second week, one of the robbers came back. It was not coincidence. One of the three had followed the mule's tracks back to the homestead and now knew that the man he assumed was dead was alive inside this house. Ruthie saw him first, a figure on the ridge to the east in the early morning light, horse standing still, watching. She went inside and took the rifle from the wall. Brennan saw her holding the rifle, looked out the window, and his face changed. It hardened in the way she recognized from the first day, the way of a man accustomed to danger and furious at his inability to stand. "Give me the rifle," he said. "With what? Your right foot cannot bear weight." "Your right hand has been swollen since yesterday." She checked the ammunition. "I can shoot." "You can shoot?" "My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to read." She looked at him over her shoulder. "You worry about lying still. I will handle the rest." She stepped onto the porch. The early Mojave sun was still a pale gold, not yet bleached to white. Her shadow fell across the sandy yard, short and solid, not retreating. "I see you," she called toward the ridge. Her voice carried in the dry air. "You come down here and talk, or you want me to talk from here?" Silence. Wind moved across the basin, lifting a thin curl of sand. Then the figure on the ridge moved, turned the horse, rode away, fast. The speed of a man who did not expect to be seen and did not expect the person who saw him to be a woman standing on a porch calling out to him directly. Ruthie stood there until the shape vanished over the ridge entirely. Then she lowered the rifle, went inside. Brennan looked at her from the bed. "You just chased off a robber by inviting him down for a conversation," he said. He did not want conversation. He wanted to watch unseen. People who watch do not like being called out. She set the rifle on the table. "Coffee?" He looked at her for a long time. "Ruthie." "What?" "I was wrong about the first thing I said." "What first thing?" "The part about not needing you to save me." He looked directly at her. "I did need it, and not just then." She stood at the edge of the kitchen table, her hand still on the rifle, and felt that sentence reach a place she did not expect. Not a place that hurt, a place that was empty, the place that 14 months of work and routine and silence had filled over without healing. And now the man lying on her husband's bed had said the thing no one had said to her in a very long time, that she was needed. She made coffee, 2 cups, brought them to the bed. They drank in silence while the Mojave brightened outside the window, white and hot and merciless and entirely real. "He will come back," Brennan said. "I know, not alone. I know that too." She drank her coffee. "But next time you will be standing." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You are already planning for next time." "I always plan," she said. What neither of them said aloud was the thing that lived underneath the coffee and the porch and the silence and the rifle. Brennan had no job, no horse, no money, and an ankle that would take weeks to heal fully. Every day he stayed here was a day he was not earning, not moving, not doing the only thing he had ever known how to do. And the question he would not ask, because asking it meant admitting the answer mattered, was whether this was temporary or whether it was something else. And if it was something else, whether he was the kind of man capable of something else. Ruthie carried her own quiet weight. She had lived through one man arriving and not leaving, and then that man leaving anyway, permanently, in the cruelest way possible, without warning and without choice. And she had lived through another man, before Nathan, who arrived and looked at her, and left the same day because she was not what he had imagined from the letters. She knew the arithmetic of attachment. She knew what it cost to let someone into a space that functioned well enough alone. She knew that the mornings with 2 coffee cups on the table were building something inside her that would be more painful to dismantle than 14 months of solitude had been. Because solitude is a wound you get used to, but hope is a wound that opens fresh every time it is disappointed. Neither of them named any of this, but it was there in the way she checked the eastern ridge every morning before stepping onto the porch. It was there in the way he watched her walk to the spring for water, and his jaw tightened because he could not carry it for her yet. It was there in the space between their chairs on the porch in the evening, a space that had been getting smaller each night by inches. Neither of them measured, but both of them noticed. His ankle healed in 4 weeks. 4 weeks during which the rhythm of the small house in the Mojave Basin changed in ways that both of them recognized, but neither named. 4 weeks during which Brennan, the man who could not bear to lie still, gradually learned what it meant to stay. Not to stay because his ankle was broken, to stay because every morning Ruthie made 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, and he did not want any morning where she made only 1. When his ankle was strong enough to bear weight, he fixed the roof. He repaired the stable. He rebuilt the stone fence along the southern edge of the property. He worked through the list she had given him, and she had not expected him to remember every item, but he did. "You remembered all of it," she said, when he came down the ladder after patching the last section of leaking roof. "You said each thing once." He looked at her from above, taller than her by 2 full heads, the afternoon Mojave sun pouring behind him, and he smiled. "I listened. You did not listen to anyone the first day. The first day I was a fool." He came down the last step, stood in front of her, close. "You taught me something in 4 weeks." "What?" "That needing someone is not weakness." His voice was low. He looked down at her, at the freckles across her nose, at the heavy braid, at the dark brown eyes that looked straight back without retreating. And being needed by someone, he paused. "Is the thing I did not know I was looking for until I was lying on your floor at midnight." Ruthie Slade looked up at the man standing in front of her, the man who had said, "I do not need you to save me," and was now standing here saying the opposite, and she felt 14 months of emptiness in this house shift to a different weight, not heavier, lighter, because now those months were the past rather than the present. But what he said next was not about her and was not about the house. It was about something he had never told her, something the fever had not loosened and the long evenings on the porch had only circled around without landing on. "There was a woman in Flagstaff," he said. 3 years ago. We had a daughter. She is 3 years old now. Her name is Ada. The air between them changed. She is with her mother. Her mother did not want me around, said I would leave anyway, so better to leave now." He looked at the ground, then at the horizon, then at her. She was right. I would have left. That is what I did. I left everything. Ruthie stood very still. "I have not seen Ada in 18 months, he said. "I send money when I have it, which is not often enough." He touched the bare wrist where there was no cord, no token, and she understood now why there was nothing there. Not because there was no child, because he believed he had not earned the right to carry a reminder of her. Several evenings later, sitting on the porch with the Mojave sky fading from amber to deep violet above the granite ridgeline, Ruthie said the first thing either of them had said about the future. "What do you want to do?" she asked. The question sat between them, not small. Larger than the desert in front of them. "I want to stop being the man who leaves," he said. She did not respond immediately. She waited because the next thing he said would matter more than anything he had said in 6 weeks, and she wanted him to find it without her pushing. "I am not staying because you are beautiful," he said. The word came out plain, not as flattery, but as a fact he was setting aside in order to reach the one behind it. "I am staying because you are the first person who told me to be quiet, and I listened. Because you stood on that porch with a rifle and did not need me to protect you. Because you gave me a list of things to fix, and I wanted to fix every one of them." He turned to look at her directly. "And because I want Ada to know that her father finally found a place worth staying in and a person worth staying for." Ruthie held that sentence. She held the weight of it, what it meant for a man who had left every place and every person to say that he wanted his daughter to know he had stopped. "I want to meet her," she said. His hands went still on his knees. She could see the knuckles whiten. "You mean that? I told you once. I do not say things I do not mean." She turned and looked at him. His eyes were wet. Not tears, not quite. The wetness of a man receiving something he had stopped believing he could have. She put her hand on his chest, her calloused broad palm flat against the dusty fabric over his heart. It was the way she did everything, steady, without hesitation, without asking permission. He put his hand over hers, held it, gentle from a hand that had broken wild horses, careful from a man who was learning that the things worth holding require the lightest grip. "Stay," she said, not a question. He leaned down and stopped, inches from her face, asked with his eyes. She did not answer with her eyes. She pulled him down. The desert did not witness it and did not need to. The Joshua trees stood still. The wind moved sand across the yard like it did every evening. But in the small house in the White Basin, where one woman had lived alone for 14 months, and one man had lived alone for 32 years, something settled into place, quiet and real and entirely enough. 7 weeks later, a small wagon came down the trail from the north, and a woman Ruthie had never seen climbed down holding the hand of a 3-year-old girl with reddish-brown hair and gray eyes that were exact copies of her father's. Brennan stood in the yard. He had not moved in 10 minutes, not since the wagon appeared on the horizon. His hands hung at his sides, and his face held the expression of a man who is afraid that the thing happening in front of him might not be real. Ada looked up at him. She did not run to him. She studied him the way children study things they are trying to remember, carefully, completely, as though memorizing the shape of his face for the next time he disappeared. Then she said, "You are tall." He knelt in the sand so that he was her height, looked at her level. "Yes," he said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable in a way that he would never have allowed any other person to hear. Ada looked past him to the porch, where Ruthie stood with her hands at her sides, braid over one shoulder. The expression on her face, something that did not have a word in any language she knew, but that felt like the first morning in 14 months, where the quiet inside the house was not empty, but waiting. "Who is that?" Ada asked. "That is Ruthie," Brennan said. "She lives here. Do I live here?" He looked back at Ruthie. She looked at him, and between them, across the sandy yard with the Joshua trees beyond, and the granite ridgeline beyond that, and the Mojave sky above it, all burning slow into evening, something passed that did not require words, because it had been building for 7 weeks in coffee cups, and silence, and repaired roofs, and a rifle held steady on a porch at dawn. "If you want to," Ruthie said, talking to the child, talking to the father, talking to herself. Ada considered this for 3 full seconds, with the gravity only a 3-year-old can bring to a question about the entire shape of her future. Then she walked past Brennan, up the porch steps, and sat down on the top step as though she had been sitting there every evening of her life. The Mojave Desert did not change because of any of this. The sand was still white. The heat was still brutal. The Joshua trees still held their arms out in every direction, like figures frozen in the middle of a gesture they would never complete. The granite boulders still rose from the flats, like old bones. The silence was still the same silence it had been for 10,000 years. But the house was different. The house had a repaired roof and a mended fence and a stable that no longer leaked. The house had 2 cups on the table every morning and 2 chairs on the porch every evening. And now the house had a child sitting on the top step, looking out at a desert she had never seen before, with eyes that were ready to see everything. Ruthie Slade sat down beside her. Brennan sat on the other side. The 3 of them watched the Mojave sky go from gold to fire to violet to black, and no one said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. The house was no longer a place where someone had been left behind. It was a place where someone had chosen to arrive. Out here in the desert, the wind takes many things away, but sometimes it leaves behind something that chooses to stay. Before we leave them there tonight, I want to ask you something. Do you believe people like him can really learn to stay? Or are some hearts simply meant to keep writing? And as you are listening to this, where are you right now? What were you doing when this story reached you? Tell me what you think. I read every comment under these stories.